Silent Guest. Chapter 4. The First Lies. Nobody moved. The words lingered in Arthur Pembroke's study long after Oliver Reid had spoken them. Every single person in Ravensmere House is a potential suspect. Rain continued its relentless rhythm against the open window, a cold breeze stirring the papers scattered across Arthur's desk. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock announced another quarter hour, its familiar chimes sounding strangely detached from the scene unfolding on the first floor. Life inside Ravensmere House had not stopped, yet something fundamental had changed. The warmth that had welcomed the guests only 24 hours earlier had vanished, replaced by a silence so complete that even breathing felt intrusive. Lucy stood just outside the study doorway, unable to tear her eyes away from Arthur. He still looked as though he might wake at any moment. His chair remained pulled neatly beneath the desk, his reading glasses perched low upon his nose, one hand resting lightly against the open leather folder. If not for the unnatural stillness that now surrounded him, he could easily have been mistaken for a man quietly considering his next sentence. It was impossible to accept that only an hour earlier they had been walking through the gardens together, talking, laughing, planning the afternoon. Lucy felt a tightness settle in her chest. Arthur had spoken so passionately about unfinished stories. Now, his own would never be finished. Oliver stepped quietly into the corridor and closed the study door until only a narrow gap remained. "I need everyone downstairs." Nobody argued. Henry emerged from the room behind him, removing his glasses to rub tiredly at the bridge of his nose. Marcus looked at him immediately. "Well?" Henry hesitated. "I'll explain downstairs." His voice remained calm, though noticeably quieter than before. Neil still hadn't moved. He stood staring at the study door as though expecting Arthur to emerge, apologizing for the dreadful misunderstanding. Oliver placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Neil." The older man blinked. "I'm sorry." Neil swallowed hard. "I've worked for him 23 years. Nobody knew what to say. There wasn't anything to say." Oliver simply nodded. "Let's go downstairs." The drawing room felt completely different now. Only 30 minutes earlier, it had been prepared for Arthur's presentation. Comfortable armchairs had been arranged around the fireplace. Coffee had been poured, and quiet conversation had filled the room as everyone waited for their host to begin. Now those same chairs seemed strangely formal, almost like witnesses. Oliver remained standing while the others gradually took their seats. Nobody reached for the untouched coffee. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from rain striking the windows and logs settling inside the fire. Oliver took a slow breath. "I appreciate this isn't how anyone expected today to unfold." His voice carried the measured confidence of someone accustomed to speaking during difficult moments. "I'm off duty." He looked around the room. "I'm not leading an official investigation." Another brief pause. "But until the police reach the island, we need to preserve whatever evidence exists." Marcus finally broke the silence. "When can they get here?" Neil answered before Oliver could. "Not until tomorrow morning." Marcus stared at him. "What?" "The tide?" Neil spoke mechanically, almost as though reciting information he no longer fully understood. "The causeway won't reopen until early tomorrow." Marcus stood abruptly. "So we're expected to stay here?" Oliver met his eyes. "You don't have much choice. There must be another boat. The engine in the boathouse isn't working." Marcus laughed once, not because anything was funny, because he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "So we're trapped." Helen Sinclair looked towards him calmly. "I believe Arthur preferred the word guests." Marcus looked back at her. "I don't think Arthur's preference matters anymore." The room fell silent again. Lucy noticed Helen lower her eyes briefly. It was the first crack she'd seen in the retired judge's composed exterior. Oliver waited until everyone settled. "Dr. Shaw?" Henry nodded quietly. "I carried out only the briefest examination." He folded his hands together. "I didn't want to disturb anything unnecessarily." Lucy noticed how carefully he chose every word. "It appears Arthur died where he was sitting." "Cause?" Andrew asked. Henry looked uncomfortable. I can't say with certainty. You must have some idea. I do. Henry paused. But I won't speculate. Marcus frowned. Surely that's ridiculous. No. Henry met his gaze evenly. It's responsible. The firmness in his voice surprised Lucy. There will be a post-mortem, Henry continued. Until then, I'm simply a doctor who confirmed a death. Oliver nodded approvingly. Thank you. Lucy wrote that sentence down. Confirmed a death, not solved a murder. There was a difference, an important one. Oliver picked up a notebook from the side table. I need everyone to help me establish a timeline. Andrew frowned. A timeline? Nothing complicated. Oliver offered a reassuring smile. I simply need to know where everyone was after lunch. Lucy immediately recognized what he was doing, starting with facts, not theories. He looked towards Marcus first. Would you mind? Marcus sighed quietly before sitting back down. I spent most of the afternoon trying unsuccessfully to find a mobile signal. The conservatory? Mostly. Anyone with you? Marcus thought. Henry passed through. Henry nodded. I did. Marcus continued. I think Andrew came outside at one point. Andrew frowned. I walked past. You waved. I suppose I did. Oliver made a note. No judgment, no reaction, just facts. Lucy watched him carefully. He wasn't interrogating people. He was letting them tell their own stories. There was a difference. Oliver turned towards Evelyn. And you? She shifted slightly in her chair. I was drawing. Where? The morning room. Alone? She hesitated. Lucy noticed. Mostly. Oliver looked up. Mostly? Lucy came in. Lucy nodded immediately. For a few minutes. Oliver wrote another note. What were you drawing? Evelyn looked faintly embarrassed. Everyone. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Everyone? She nodded. I like faces. Oliver smiled politely. Would you mind showing me later? If it helps. I think it might. Lucy made a mental note. Arthur had been among those sketches, potentially one of the last accurate records of him alive. Oliver turned another page. Andrew. The history teacher sat forward. I was in the library. With Dr. Shaw. Henry nodded. For perhaps 20 minutes. Andrew smiled weakly. I became distracted. I noticed. A ripple of faint smiles passed around the room. For just a second, the tension eased. Then everyone remembered why they were there. Oliver looked towards Helen. Mrs. Sinclair? Helen. She folded her newspaper carefully before answering. I remained here. The entire time? No. She considered. I visited the downstairs cloakroom. Oliver nodded. Approximately when? I've absolutely no idea. She looked almost irritated by the question. I wasn't expecting to need an alibi. Nobody was. That sentence hung heavily in the room, because it was true. Only this morning, they'd all been guests. Now, they were suspects. Lucy looked towards Elliot Brooks. Throughout the entire conversation, he hadn't spoken once. Not once. Oliver noticed too. Mr. Brooks? Elliot looked up. Could you tell us where you spent the afternoon? He answered quietly. Outside. Lucy frowned. In the rain? I like photographing weather. Oliver nodded. You were alone? Yes. Did anyone see you? A pause. I don't know. Oliver wrote another note. Lucy couldn't explain why, but Elliot's answers felt carefully measured. Not evasive, measured. There was a difference. She simply wasn't sure what it was yet. Oliver finally looked towards Lucy. And you? I was with Arthur. Every head turned. She hadn't expected that. I mean, she quickly corrected herself. I was with him in the library. Oliver's expression remained neutral. How long? Perhaps half an hour. What did you discuss? Lucy hesitated. Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Stories have to be told in the right order. She looked at the leather folder resting quietly on the side table. We talked about Amelia. Oliver waited. And? He wanted my opinion. On what? Lucy slowly shook her head. He never got that far. The room fell silent once more, because everyone suddenly realized the same thing. Arthur Pembroke had been preparing to reveal something, and whatever it was, he had died before he could tell them. The silence that followed Lucy's final sentence seemed to settle over the drawing room like a heavy blanket. Arthur had invited them. Arthur had gathered them. Arthur had promised answers. Now Arthur was dead. Marcus broke the silence first. So what happens now? Nobody answered immediately. It was a simple question, yet none of them seemed prepared for it. Oliver rested his notebook on the arm of a chair. Now we wait for the police. And until then, Marcus asked, we leave Arthur's study exactly as it is. Oliver's voice remained calm and deliberate. Nobody enters that room unless it's absolutely necessary. Marcus folded his arms. You're assuming this was murder. I'm assuming nothing. Oliver met his gaze evenly. But until a doctor or police officer proves otherwise, we should treat it as suspicious. Henry nodded in agreement. I think that's sensible. Marcus sighed. I suppose. Oliver looked around the room. Did anyone notice anything unusual today? The question hung unanswered. Andrew rubbed the back of his neck. Unusual in what way? Anything. A conversation. An argument. Someone behaving differently. Lucy searched her memory. The walk through the gardens, Arthur laughing, Evelyn sketching, Elliot photographing the house. Then, she frowned. Elliot! Every head turned towards him. He remained remarkably composed. You photographed Arthur. Elliot nodded once. Yes. Why? I photograph people. Marcus frowned. You barely knew him. I don't need to know someone to photograph them. Lucy wasn't accusing him. She was genuinely curious. You lowered your camera the moment Arthur looked at you. Elliot looked down briefly. I don't like people posing. Oliver watched the exchange carefully but said nothing. Instead, he made another note. Lucy couldn't tell whether the explanation satisfied him. Truthfully, she wasn't sure whether it satisfied her either. Neil suddenly stood. I need to check the kitchen. Marcus looked at him in disbelief. The kitchen? Neil nodded. People still need to eat. Nobody replied. He looked around the room with tired eyes. Arthur would have expected that. Without waiting for permission, he quietly left. Lucy watched him disappear through the doorway. Grief affected people differently. Some cried, some became angry, some simply carried on because stopping felt impossible. Neil seemed to belong firmly to the last group. Rain intensified outside once more. The drawing room darkened enough that Henry crossed quietly to switch on 2 table lamps. Warm amber light spread across the room, softening the harsh gray afternoon beyond the windows. Andrew looked towards the fire. It feels wrong. Oliver glanced at him. What does? Everything. Andrew gave a helpless laugh. This morning, Arthur was showing me parish records. He shook his head. Now we're discussing alibis. Nobody challenged him, because everyone had been thinking exactly the same thing. Helen finally spoke. There is another matter. Oliver looked towards her. The presentation. Lucy followed her gaze towards a leather folder resting on the side table. Helen continued quietly. Arthur clearly intended to show us something. Marcus immediately nodded. Exactly. Oliver's expression hardened slightly. And, Marcus spread his hands, if whatever he discovered got him killed, Oliver interrupted gently. You're already assuming he was killed. Marcus sighed. Fine. If. Oliver waited. Then whatever is inside that folder could explain why. Nobody spoke. The leather folder suddenly seemed to dominate the room. Lucy found herself staring at it. Arthur had carried it everywhere, protected it, prepared it. Now it sat only a few feet away, untouched. Oliver followed everyone's eyes. I'm not opening it. Marcus looked surprised. Why not? Because Arthur intended to present it himself. Marcus frowned. He's dead. I know. Oliver's voice remained level. But until the police arrive, that folder is evidence. Henry nodded again. I agree. Marcus leaned back in frustration. So we simply sit here? No. Oliver closed his notebook. We remain available. And we remember. Every conversation, every movement, every detail. Lucy realized he wasn't really speaking to the group anymore. He was speaking to himself, building the investigation in his mind. An hour later, the rain eased slightly, leaving Ravensmere House wrapped in a heavy, colorless dusk. Nobody had much appetite for dinner. Neil nevertheless insisted upon bringing sandwiches and tea into the drawing room. Arthur would have hated everyone going hungry. The tray sat mostly untouched. Andrew managed half a sandwich. Marcus drank 2 cups of coffee. Helen accepted tea. Lucy barely noticed what she was eating. Her thoughts kept returning to Arthur, more specifically, to one sentence. Stories have to be told in the right order. He had repeated the idea twice, as though it mattered enormously. She looked again towards the folder. Perhaps the story still could be told, just not by Arthur. The grandfather clock struck 6. Oliver stood. I think everyone should try to get some rest. Marcus gave him a look that suggested rest was the last thing on anyone's mind. Oliver continued, We're exhausted. We've all had a shock. And tired people remember things badly. He looked around the room. If anyone remembers something, anything, come straight to me. There were quiet nods. One by one, the guests began leaving. Andrew headed upstairs slowly, shoulders slumped. Henry offered Neil help in the kitchen before disappearing down the corridor. Helen paused beside Arthur's empty chair for several seconds before continuing silently from the room. Marcus lingered only long enough to refill his coffee. Soon only Lucy and Oliver remained. The fire burned low. Rain whispered softly against the windows. Oliver closed his notebook. What are you thinking? Lucy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the empty doorway leading into the entrance hall. I think Arthur knew. Oliver frowned. Knew what? That whatever he was about to reveal, she searched carefully for the right words, was going to change every life in this house. Oliver considered that. I think you're right. Lucy looked towards him. But I don't think that's the first question we should ask. What is? She glanced once more at the untouched leather folder. If Arthur spent 10 years bringing 9 strangers together, she met Oliver's eyes. Why was he so certain we'd all stay? Oliver stared at her for a moment. Then, very slowly, he looked back towards the folder. For the first time since Arthur's death, a different possibility entered his mind. Perhaps Arthur hadn't invited 9 strangers to Ravensmere House. Perhaps he had invited 9 people who were already connected. They simply didn't know it yet. Outside, somewhere beyond the mist-covered cliffs, thunder rolled quietly across the sea. Inside Ravensmere House, no one realized that Arthur Pembroke's murder was only the beginning.